The first night I spent in the house, I could hear the old wood creaking, like the house was breathing. You'd think I'd get used to it. But I didn't. I just stared at the walls, half expecting them to close in on me. I remember when I first laid eyes on the place, new house, we called it. A fresh start, I thought. I had recently gotten divorced, and after months of couch surfing, I found a decent deal in a quiet neighborhood, far enough from the city to feel like a retreat. It was a little too quiet, though. But I shrugged it off. This place was perfect, or so it seemed. Moving in, I noticed the house had an odd vibe. It wasn't the smell of dust or old furniture, no, it was deeper than that. Almost like the house was waiting. I didn't really want to believe it. The last thing I needed was to become one of those people who thought their house was haunted. Still, there was something unsettling about it. On that first night, I turned off the lights and tried to get some sleep. I pulled the covers tight around me, my eyes darting around the dark room, trying to find some comfort in the shadows. But it wasn't the shadows that kept me up. No. It was the sound. It started low, a faint scrape, like nails dragging on wood. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. The sound grew louder, closer. My eyes shot to the door, but I didn't dare move. My mind raced. Was it just the house settling? It had to be. But why did it feel like something, or someone, was just beyond the door? Then, I heard it. The unmistakable sound of footsteps. I held my breath, trying to steady my racing heart. The footsteps weren't just random creaks. They were deliberate, slow, like someone was walking around in the hall outside my bedroom. My skin prickled, and the hair on the back of my neck stood up. I was paralyzed with fear, but I couldn't ignore it. I had to know. I slowly swung my legs over the side of the bed and stood up, the floorboards cold against my bare feet. Every step I took sounded like thunder in the stillness of the night. I crept toward the door, barely able to breathe as I reached for the doorknob. The moment I touched it, the footsteps stopped. I froze. My fingers trembled on the doorknob as the seconds ticked by, and then, without warning, the door flew open on its own. I stumbled back, nearly falling to the floor. The hallway outside was dark, too dark. I strained my eyes, but I couldn't see a thing. There was no one there. But the air was thick, like something was watching me. My stomach churned. I stepped into the hallway, but the instant I did, I felt the temperature drop. It was like the house had swallowed the warmth, leaving nothing but an icy chill. I turned left and right, but saw nothing, heard nothing. Then, I noticed something. A faint shadow moved across the wall at the end of the hallway, just beyond the reach of the dim light from the staircase. It was fast, almost like it was avoiding the light. I swallowed hard, trying to steady myself. What the hell was that? I took a hesitant step forward, then another, my heartbeat hammering in my chest. The shadow shifted again, and my eyes followed it, unwilling to tear my gaze away. That's when I saw it. At the far end of the hall, a figure stood in the corner, completely still. Its shape was indistinct, but I could tell it was tall. Too tall. I couldn't make out any details, but the sense of something, someone, was overwhelming. Suddenly, the silence was broken by a soft whisper. It was so quiet, so faint, but I could hear it clearly. Get out. I froze. My heart skipped a beat, then began racing again. The voice, so soft, almost like it was coming from the walls themselves, sent a cold wave of dread over me. Get out. It wasn't a request. It was a command. I swallowed hard, trying to fight the urge to run. But my legs felt like stone, heavy and unmovable. Every instinct screamed at me to flee, but my body refused to obey. I tried to speak, to ask who or what was there, but the words caught in my throat. The figure at the end of the hall shifted. I could see it move now, its outline growing clearer in the dim light. It was tall, impossibly tall. The darkness seemed to cling to it like a shroud, bending the light around it, warping its shape. It wasn't human, not entirely. I should have run. I should have slammed the door shut, locked it, and never looked back. But instead, my feet carried me closer. A morbid curiosity had overtaken my fear. What was it? Who was it? As I moved closer, the air grew colder, and I could see my breath clouding in front of me. It was unnatural, this coldness, this oppressive heaviness in the air. The whisper came again, sharper this time, as if it were right behind me. Leave. I wanted to turn and run. I wanted to scream, to shout for help, but nothing came out. My body was frozen, trapped in this nightmare. I couldn't look away from the shadow. I could feel it watching me, its presence crawling under my skin, suffocating me. Then, without warning, the figure moved. It was fast, too fast. In the blink of an eye, it was standing right in front of me. My breath hitched as I staggered back, but it was too late. I was already pinned against the wall, the coldness of the figure pressing against me. Leave, it whispered again. But this time, there was something else in its voice, a hint of something malicious, something far older and far darker than any human could comprehend. I could feel my pulse pounding in my ears, could hear the blood rushing through my veins. It was right there, so close I could almost reach out and touch it. But I didn't dare. My body screamed at me to move, to get away, but I stood frozen, as if my legs had turned to stone. Then, I heard it, the sound of a door creaking open behind me. I didn't have time to react. The figure lunged. The figure lunged at me with a force I couldn't comprehend. My breath caught in my throat as cold, skeletal hands grabbed hold of my wrists. I tried to scream, but nothing came out. It was like my voice had been stolen by the very air around me. For a moment, everything went black. The light in the hallway seemed to vanish, and I felt like I was falling into an abyss, surrounded by an unbearable chill. It wasn't just cold, it was as though the very essence of warmth had been ripped from the room. My skin felt as if it were being burned by the icy grip of whatever held me. I struggled, but it was no use. The figure had me in its grasp, and it wasn't letting go. I could feel its breath, or what I assumed was its breath, brush against my neck, like a foul wind. The whisper came again, louder this time, filling my mind with its command. Leave now. I had no idea how I was still standing, how I was still breathing. My muscles screamed in protest, but I kept fighting. Desperation was beginning to take over, and I shoved with every ounce of strength I had, pushing against its cold body. The figure didn't budge. And then, something changed. The pressure around my wrists loosened for a split second, just long enough for me to break free. I didn't think, didn't hesitate. I turned and bolted down the hallway, my feet barely touching the floor as I sprinted toward the stairs. But the house wasn't done with me yet. As I reached the bottom of the stairs, I felt something behind me, something that made my blood run cold. I glanced over my shoulder and saw it, no longer a shadow, but something that looked almost human. Its eyes were dark, soulless pits, like endless voids, and it was moving toward me with an unnatural speed. The air around it shimmered, as though reality itself was warping. I didn't stop to look again. I tore down the stairs, my heart hammering in my chest. The front door was so close, just a few more steps, and I could escape. But before I could reach it, I felt a cold hand wrap around my ankle, dragging me back, pulling me toward the darkness. I screamed. I kicked and struggled, but whatever it was had a grip on me that felt like iron. I twisted around, my breath ragged and panicked, and saw nothing but that darkness creeping closer. It was all around me now, like a fog suffocating everything it touched. In a blind panic, I reached out for anything that could save me. My fingers brushed the doorknob, and I twisted it with all my strength. The door creaked open with a groan, and I shoved myself forward, slamming the door shut behind me with everything I had. I collapsed onto the porch, gasping for air, my whole body shaking. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still out there, waiting for me. Something that wouldn't let me go. I didn't dare look back at the house. My mind was screaming at me to run, to get as far away from that place as possible. The porch steps felt like they were made of lead, my legs heavy with fear. My breath was ragged, and my heart felt like it was about to burst from my chest. I stumbled off the porch, barely registering the gravel scraping beneath my shoes. My car was parked at the end of the driveway, but it felt like it was miles away. Every step was torture, every movement a struggle to keep the panic at bay. I could still feel it, something watching me, something lingering just behind me. The oppressive silence of the night seemed to press in on me, suffocating me. I didn't dare turn around. When I reached my car, I fumbled with the keys, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get the door open. The sound of my heartbeat was deafening, the thud of it in my ears drowning out everything else. I finally got the door open and jumped inside, slamming it shut behind me. But as I started the engine, I felt a chill seep into the car. It wasn't just the air, it was like the car itself had become infected with that same cold that had filled the house. I glanced nervously in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see that shadowy figure standing behind me, staring through the glass. But there was nothing. I breathed a small sigh of relief and slammed the car into drive, tearing out of the driveway. I wasn't looking back. I couldn't. As I sped down the road, the darkness of the night seemed to wrap around me. I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see headlights following me, or worse, the figure from the house. But nothing appeared. I thought I had made it out. I thought I was safe. Then, the radio crackled to life. I hadn't touched it. I hadn't even noticed it was on. But now, the static filled the car, loud and sharp. The voice that came through the static was unmistakable. "Get out." I slammed my foot on the brake, my heart leaping into my throat. My hands were trembling on the steering wheel. I looked around in a frenzy, trying to make sense of what was happening. But there was no one in the car with me. The voice, cold, chilling, empty, came again. "You can't run. You can't escape." I glanced at the rearview mirror one more time, my eyes wide with terror. And that's when I saw it. The figure, tall, dark, and twisted, was standing in the back seat of my car. I froze. The figure was right there, right behind me, so close I could feel its cold presence pressing against my back. My eyes locked on the rearview mirror, but I couldn't look away. The darkness seemed to pulse, like it was alive. Its eyes, those empty, soulless pits, stared back at me, and I could feel them boring into me. I felt its presence crawl beneath my skin, into my bones, like it was slowly becoming part of me. I gasped for air, my breath coming in shallow, panicked bursts. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. I slammed my foot on the accelerator, my car jerking forward, but it was like the house had a hold of me. No matter how fast I went, the figure stayed right there, its presence suffocating the air around me. My vision blurred with tears of terror as I glanced back at the road, trying to keep control of the car. I was speeding now, way too fast. The engine roared, the tires screeching as I swerved around corners. But no matter how far I drove, no matter how fast, I could still feel it there, watching, waiting. Then, without warning, the radio crackled again, that same static filling the car. The voice came through, cold and distant, but somehow so close it made my skin crawl. "You can't run, Jason." I didn't remember telling the house my name. It couldn't know. But there it was, speaking it, with that eerie certainty. My name. The figure was still in the back seat, its eyes never leaving me. I could see it shifting, its shape warping, twisting in the dim light. I glanced in the mirror again, and that's when I saw it. The figure was now right behind me, inches from my face, its cold breath hitting my skin. I screamed, my foot slamming on the brakes. The car screeched to a halt, the tires skidding across the asphalt. I was paralyzed, unable to move, unable to think. And then, in the blink of an eye, the figure was gone. I whipped my head around, looking for it, but there was nothing. The back seat was empty. The air felt still, almost too still. My heart pounded in my chest as I dared to look out the windshield. The road ahead was empty, quiet. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still out there, watching me. Waiting for me. The moment of relief was brief. Suddenly, the headlights flickered. First, once, then again, flickering like a dying flame. And that's when the engine sputtered, cutting off entirely. The car coasted to a stop, the sound of it dying out like a fading breath. Panic gripped me. My hands shook as I tried to restart the car, but it was useless. The engine wouldn't turn over. The car was dead. I looked around. The road was dark, and there were no houses for miles. I was stuck. And in the distance, I could see it, just beyond the tree line, a figure moving toward me, fast, its silhouette towering against the faint moonlight. And this time, it wasn't just one figure. There were more. I couldn't breathe. The world seemed to close in around me, and I was trapped. My heart pounded so loudly in my chest, it drowned out everything else. The car was dead, my only means of escape now useless. The headlights flickered one last time and then went dark. The road ahead was pitch black, but I could still see them. Figures, no, shapes, moving toward me from the trees, shadows creeping out of the dark. The moonlight caught on something reflective, like eyes. Hundreds of them. It felt like they were everywhere, surrounding me. I scrambled out of the car, my legs unsteady, my mind racing. I had to get away. I didn't even know where I was going, I just had to move, had to run. But the moment I stepped onto the gravel, I heard it. A whisper, so faint at first that I almost thought I imagined it. Jason. My name. I turned, my body moving before my mind could catch up. And there it was, the tall figure. It was standing in the middle of the road, taller than anything I'd seen before, its face hidden in the shadows. But those eyes, those dark, bottomless pits, glowed faintly in the night. And it was staring directly at me. I tried to move, tried to run, but my feet wouldn't obey. The air felt thick, as though it were holding me in place. The whispers grew louder, now more than one voice, all speaking at once, overlapping, blending together until they became a cacophony of chilling sounds. Leave. Leave. You can't escape, Jason. The words made no sense. How could they know me? How could they know my name, my thoughts? But there was no denying it. This was real. This thing in front of me, and the others coming from the trees, they were real. The figure stepped forward, its presence so overwhelming that I couldn't think. My body screamed for me to run, but I stood frozen, caught in its gaze. Then, I saw it move, faster than I thought possible. In the blink of an eye, the figure was right in front of me, and I could feel the cold radiating off of it. The temperature around me dropped so fast, I could see my breath misting in front of me. The whispers stopped, and the air grew still. It was right there, its face just inches from mine. But I couldn't make it out. There was no face, just a dark, swirling void, like staring into a hole in the universe. I felt myself being pulled in, my body weakening, my vision blurry, as though I were being consumed by that darkness. Then, the voice came again. You don't belong here. Leave, or never return. I couldn't move. My mind screamed at me to get out of there, but I was paralyzed. The darkness was too strong, too overpowering. And just when I thought it was all over, a scream, loud, human, ripped through the air. It wasn't mine. It wasn't the figures. It came from behind me. I turned, barely able to make out a figure running toward me from the woods. Another person. They were running straight toward the creatures. The scream echoed in the stillness, slicing through the silence like a knife. My body snapped toward the sound, my eyes struggling to focus on the figure running toward me from the trees. My heart skipped a beat. Who the hell was this? Was I going crazy? The figure was frantic, disheveled, clearly running for their life. It wasn't much more than a silhouette at first, but as they drew closer, I could see them clearly, a man, maybe in his mid-30s, his face pale with terror. His clothes were torn, like he'd been running through the woods for days, and his eyes. His eyes were wide with panic. He didn't stop. In fact, he sped up, charging straight at me, the shadows seeming to chase him. Behind him, I saw the figures, the tall, dark beings, shift. They were following him, moving in sync, their glowing eyes reflecting the light from the dying moon. I wanted to shout at him, tell him to stop, to turn around and run, but my voice had betrayed me. My throat was dry, my mouth too parched to speak. He reached me in a blur of motion, stumbling to a stop right in front of me. His breath was coming in sharp, ragged gasps. Get out of here, he panted, looking over his shoulder, his eyes wide with fear. They'll take you, too. You can't stay. You can't stay here. I barely had time to process his words before the creatures began to close in on us. They moved faster now, their forms flickering in and out of the darkness, like they were barely even part of this world. The air grew colder with each step they took. I could feel it in my bones. I grabbed the man by the arm, shaking him, desperate for some kind of sense. Who are they? What do they want with us? My voice was barely a whisper, lost beneath the sound of my own heartbeat. The man looked back at me, his face pale with dread. It's too late. You can't escape them, not once they've marked you. He looked down at his hands, trembling. I followed his gaze and saw a faint, dark stain, black, like ink, on his palms. What is that? I asked, my voice trembling. His eyes flickered with panic, then he whispered, it's their mark. Once they touch you, once they know your name, they won't stop. You belong to them now. Before I could say another word, a low growl echoed from behind us. One of the creatures was closing in, its form growing larger and more distinct, its glowing eyes fixed on us. I didn't think. I just ran. I pulled the man with me, tearing through the woods, my feet tripping over roots and branches, my heart pounding in my ears. The night around us felt alive, the trees whispering with the same voices that had haunted me. Leave. Leave. Leave, the man stumbled beside me, but I didn't stop. I had no plan. No direction. All I could think of was escaping. Then, the ground beneath me shifted. I didn't see it coming. One moment, I was running, the next, everything was falling. The earth split beneath my feet, and I was dragged down into the darkness. I screamed as I tumbled, my body slamming against the jagged rocks that seemed to appear from nowhere. The man's scream was lost in the air as we both fell deeper, into the pitch-black void below. The fall seemed endless. I could feel the wind rushing past me, a deafening roar in my ears as I tumbled, helpless. My body slammed against jagged rocks, the sharp edges tearing into my skin. Every time I thought I was about to hit the ground, I fell further. Finally, the world went still. I landed hard, the impact knocking the breath from my lungs. I gasped, unable to move, my chest heaving as pain shot through my body. My head spun, and I tried to push myself up, but everything was dark, utterly, suffocatingly dark. The air was thick, humid, and the temperature was even colder than before. I could barely make out the shape of the man, his form barely visible in the blackness. He was lying on the ground beside me, groaning, trying to push himself up. What the hell was that? he whispered, his voice trembling. I could barely answer him. My breath came in ragged gasps, my limbs shaking from the shock of the fall. I scanned the surroundings, but there was nothing to see. The darkness felt alive, pressing in on me from every angle. The air was heavy, dense with an unnatural energy. The man crawled toward me, his hands searching for something to hold on to. They'll find us, they always find you, what is this place? I forced the words out, my throat tight with fear. He shook his head, eyes wide with terror. It's where they keep you. Where they drag you once you fall too far, once they've marked you. His voice was low, almost a whisper, like speaking any louder would draw their attention. This is where they make you one of them. I stared at him, confused, and then looked around again. It felt like we were underground, but it was impossible to tell. The blackness swallowed everything. But then, something moved. I saw it, a flicker in the distance. A shape, shifting in and out of existence. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me, but then it came closer. It was tall. Too tall. Its form stretched and warped as if it was made of shadows and smoke, something inhuman. I could barely make out the shape of it, but I could feel its presence, as though it was drawing closer with every passing second. My pulse quickened. Run, the man gasped, his voice hoarse. He scrambled to his feet, pulling me with him. But I couldn't move fast enough. My legs felt like lead, and my mind was still reeling from the shock of the fall. The figure came closer, its movement jerky, unnatural. The air around us grew colder still, the darkness wrapping tighter around me. The whispers returned, soft and insistent, like 1,000 voices pressing against my brain. Leave. Leave. You belong to us. I turned, trying to push past the man, but the ground beneath me was shifting again. The walls of the pit were closing in, bending inward, narrowing like a trap. We were surrounded. The man stumbled, falling to his knees, his hand clutching at his chest. They're here, they're here. His voice was cracking, his eyes wild with panic. But it was too late. The figures had reached us, their shadows twisting around him. He screamed, but the sound was drowned out by the oppressive silence, swallowed by the darkness. I watched in horror as the figure seemed to engulf him, his body contorting in impossible ways. His mouth opened in a silent scream, but nothing came out. The darkness swallowed him whole, and I could hear his bones breaking, the sound echoing in the empty space. I didn't wait to see more. I turned and ran, as fast as my legs would carry me. The shadows reached out, scraping at my skin, but I kept going, pushing through the pain, through the fear. The whispers were louder now, louder than before. But there was something else, something worse. A deep, rumbling growl, low and primal, like the earth itself was growling beneath me. And then I heard it. The sound of footsteps. Not just one set, but many, dozens, echoing through the darkness, getting closer. I ran, my lungs burning, my chest tight. The ground seemed to shift beneath me, pulling me deeper into the earth, as though it was trying to drag me down. I was running out of time. I couldn't breathe. My lungs burned, my body was screaming, but I kept running. The footsteps, those unearthly, bone-chilling footsteps, grew louder with every second, surrounding me, closing in from every direction. The whispers became a maddening chorus, their words now a constant barrage in my ears. You can't escape. You belong here. You belong to us. I couldn't tell where I was anymore. The darkness was absolute, suffocating. The ground beneath me shifted with every step, and every time I tried to change direction, the earth seemed to pull me back toward the center. I stumbled, falling hard to the ground. Pain shot up my leg, but I forced myself back to my feet, dragging myself forward. The whispers were louder now, surrounding me, suffocating me. I tried to block them out, tried to ignore the icy fingers of fear crawling up my spine, but it was impossible. They were everywhere. Then, I heard it. A voice, different from the others, cutting through the noise. Jason. It was soft. Gentle, even. And it wasn't the voice of the creatures. It wasn't the whispering darkness. It was a human voice. I froze. Jason, the voice said again, this time closer. I turned slowly, my eyes searching through the oppressive blackness. And then, just barely visible through the gloom, I saw a figure, someone standing just at the edge of the shadows. It was the man I had met earlier, the one who had warned me. But now, he looked different. His face was pale, his eyes hollow, his body twisted in unnatural ways, as though he had already been consumed by whatever force haunted this place. Don't listen to them, he rasped. It's too late for me, but you can still leave. You can still escape. His voice was broken, barely a whisper. He reached out toward me with a shaking hand, his fingers trembling, pleading. I wanted to run, to flee from the nightmare that was consuming him, but something in his eyes, something in his voice, made me hesitate. You have to leave. They feed on fear. They feed on us. You can still make it out. You have to move now. Don't let them touch you. Before I could say anything, his body jerked violently. His eyes widened in terror as something, dark, formless, and massive, emerged from the shadows behind him. The figure was towering, shifting, a writhing mass of darkness and smoke. It swallowed the man whole, and his scream was silenced, drowned in the void. The ground trembled beneath me as the creature turned toward me. I could feel it, the weight of its presence, the darkness that pressed in on me from all sides. It was too late to run. I couldn't outrun it. I couldn't escape. I closed my eyes, bracing myself for the inevitable. I could hear it now, its voice, low and deep, a rumbling growl that vibrated through my chest. Jason, the name echoed around me. I felt its cold hands around my throat, tightening, squeezing the air from my lungs. And then, a flash of light. It came out of nowhere, blinding in its intensity. I shielded my eyes, but it was too bright, too much. The ground beneath me cracked open, light streaming through the fissures like beams from the heavens. The darkness recoiled, shrieking in fury as the light tore through it, ripping it apart. And just as suddenly as it had all begun, the world went still. The whispers were gone. The shadows, the figures, they were all gone. The earth beneath me was solid again, the air warm, the silence deafening. I opened my eyes, blinking against the sudden brightness. I was lying on solid ground, bathed in sunlight. The darkness, the creatures, the abyss, they were gone. I didn't know how long I'd been lying there, but I knew one thing for certain, I was free. I had escaped. But I also knew something else, something I couldn't shake. The house. The place where it all started, it wasn't gone. And it would always be there. Waiting.